Hello, my name is Brian Hickman. I am a member of the piano faculty at the Center for Musical Arts. Today I will talk to you about music that will be performed on the Colorado Music Festival concert, featuring conductor Michael Christie and pianist Michelle Cann. The first work on this program is the Piano Concerto in G major by Maurice Ravel. This work was completed in November of 1931, and the premiere was in Paris on the 14th of January of 1932. This work was conducted by the composer, and pianist Marguerite Long was the soloist. It was Ravel's intention to take this work on tour across several continents, across Europe, across North America and South America, as well as Asia. But because of health reasons, he was unable to do so. His health was in decline, so his tour was limited to the continent of Europe. This work is set in 3 movements. And the first is Allegramento. In this first movement, there are 5 distinct themes that are presented. And the first suggests a Basque folk melody, the second is Spanish influenced, and then the remaining 3 thematic ideas are influenced by the jazz idiom. In this movement, it opens with this bitonal pungency that emanates from these arpeggiated figures being played by the piano. And those arpeggiated figures are accompanied by solos from the piccolo and the trumpet. The development mainly focuses on the opening theme and the jazz material presented in the exposition. And then in the recapitulation, you'll find that there were some unusual features that were not necessarily customary in the concerto form. In particular, there were cadenzas in the concerto, in the recapitulation, for the harp as well as the woodwinds, before the piano cadenza was presented. The movement has an extended coda, and then it ends with a series of descending major and minor chords. The second movement, probably my favorite of this concerto, is the Adagio Assai in E major. It has some spacious qualities about it. The thematic idea is very open, very beautiful, and it has a seemingly floating effect to me. And the melody seems to float effortlessly, and when you listen to it against the harmonic rhythmic background, for me, I actually wondered about what was going on, and it took having a closer look at the score to figure it out. And what I noticed was that what was going on was the melody definitely felt like it was in 3/4 time, but when you listen to the harmonic and rhythmic and harmonic background that was played by the piano, you notice the left-hand portion of the piano's part felt more like it was in 6/8, and so you had this feeling of a juxtaposition of 2 different time signatures that created this almost detached effect that I thought personally was a very wonderful effect in the music. The last movement is the Presto, and it opens with a drum roll and a fanfare. And this particular movement has 3 primary themes, main themes that you'll hear. The first resembles a piercing train whistle. The second is folk-like and syncopated. And then the third thematic idea is a boisterous march. And what you'll notice is that this opening fanfare happens to be also a framing and punctuating feature of this movement, where every time there's a change of material, a change of idea, this fanfare actually announced it. And then this fanfare also closes that final movement in a very boisterous and very playful manner. The humor of this particular movement was also noteworthy. It reminds me of the humor of Stravinsky, and it gives you that playful, lighthearted feeling as if you were listening to one of Stravinsky's works. Now, the second piece on this program is the piano concerto in one movement by composer Florence Price. And in this concerto, it's a very wonderful piece that I think it warrants going into a little more detail about the composer and the background of this work. A little bit about Florence Price. She was born on the 9th of April of 1887, and she was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, and she received her first music lessons from her mother at the age of 4. So she started studying piano quite young. And she graduated high school at the age of 16 and was that same year accepted to study music at the New England Conservatory in Boston. While at the NEC, she studied composition under George Chadwick, who encouraged her to take the folk melodies from her cultural background and to incorporate them into her compositions, as well as the rhythms and the harmonies that she was quite familiar with. She graduated with a teacher's diploma in piano and a soloist diploma in organ. Florence Price was the first African-American female classical composer to gain a national reputation, which was quite impressive in seeing that she accomplished this during the era of Jim Crow in America. Now, more about the concerto. This concerto was premiered in 1934 at Chicago Musical College, and the concerto was only performed once, and then it was neglected, it was forgotten, and the parts for the concerto were scattered. The parts were found in 2009, and they were found at Price's abandoned summer home. But no copy of the manuscript was found, just some of the parts. So another composer named Trevor Watson was commissioned to reconstruct the score and to revive this piece. Now, describing the music, this piece is written in 3 distinct sections. There is the opening section where there's a slow introduction followed by this urgent lyrical section. The second section of this concerto was very tender, very lyrical, which I found quite moving. And then the third section is a juba dance, which was a very popular folk dance of the plantation slaves before the Civil War. Now, I understand that meaning in music is quite subjective, but I thought that maybe I could add a few things to maybe understanding this work and offer some insight, because myself, I also grew up in the Deep South and grew up only maybe a few hours drive away from Little Rock on the opposite edge of the Mississippi Delta. And so the sounds and the melodies that you hear in this concerto, I was quite familiar with, the styles, the harmonies, the rhythms, because these were melodies that were drawn from the African American tradition of works like the work song. You've had the field holler, things like the Negro spirituals. These things were actually a major part of my own musical formation. So it was like really something that I could identify with. And when I heard just the first few measures of this concerto, I was immediately made aware. I knew right away, and I could quite easily connect to what was being presented in the music. So this music, the first movement, it really speaks a lot about the struggle of Black people in America, particularly historically, because of of course, all the injustice and things that have happened due to slavery and things like Jim Crow and things like that. And these sounds, I think, really resonate through this music. And so this first movement really speaks of struggle. And then the second movement, I felt was very moving because what I heard when I listened to that movement or that section of the concerto was that the music seemed to speak of comfort. This music seemed to, in the second section, speak of comfort coming from someone who themselves have already suffered, has also suffered. And then because of that, there was this sense of understanding, of, I guess, consolation that came knowing that someone had also been going through something difficult. The third movement was, like I said earlier, the Juba dance, which I think speaks of joy. And I think this is a kind of joy that's very meaningful, very powerful, because it comes from a place of hope and a place of pleasure in spite of the difficult circumstances that the people they grew up in or were born into, or that they were brought into against their will. So despite the harshness of a life of slavery, the slaves managed to still find a way to have joy and to have hope. And I thought that this music really speaks to that, and it was very beautifully done. And I think it really points to that. I think this piece really embodies the lived experience of Black people in America, and it expresses the relentless hope in the face of trials. And I think because of that, I really sense this concerto really is very meaningful. Now, moving on to the last piece on the program, which is Tchaikovsky's Symphony Number 4 in F minor, which I think is a tour de force of symphonic literature. This piece was written over the course of about a year, from the spring of 1877 to the 7th of January 1878. With the financial support of a wealthy patron named Nadezhda von Meck, Tchaikovsky was able to write this work. Now, von Meck only required Tchaikovsky to correspond with her through letters. The two had never met in person, but they precipitated their relationship through these letters. And in those letters, Tchaikovsky was to talk about the music that he was writing, composing at the time. Now, the symphony was premiered on the 22nd of January of 1878 during the 10th concert of the Russian Musical Society. And Nikolai Rubinstein, who was Tchaikovsky's mentor, was the conductor. In describing the music, Tchaikovsky considered this symphony one of his best works, and he held to that conviction for many years. Now, the composer described this symphony in a letter to von Meck, and so I think it would be good to use his description to talk about this music. The first movement, he said, was the thematic idea presented in the introduction was to be characterized as fate. It was a fanfare which frames the symphony. It really sets up the overall idea of the symphony. Tchaikovsky characterized this thematic idea as fate, which is an unconquerable force that we all have to strive against as we search for happiness. And this work really builds to great dramatic feeling as you progress through the movement, and the rhythmic motifs, everything that comes together in such a powerful way, I think really makes this powerfully effective. The second movement expresses a kind of sadness, maybe not the same as the sadness or despondency of having to struggle against a force like fate, but this sadness in the second movement has to do with a type that comes after a long day's toil, and one might be sitting and reminiscing about times of past that were good times, and maybe that those times are now gone. Now, the third movement, Tchaikovsky said that it really doesn't speak to any particular sentiment, but it was just a series of ideas, a series of thoughts or images that one might experience as you might feel the first feelings of intoxication after having drunk a little bit of wine. And in the final movement, it is described as a depiction. It is a search for joy, looking, and sometimes maybe that joy cannot be found from within, but maybe one would have to look for that joy in others. And so in this movement, if one is unable to find joy within himself, then Tchaikovsky would be, he described it as looking for it in others. But yet, even in finding this joy, you'll find that fate still has a way of finding you. You'll find that regardless of the happiness, that fate is always still hanging over your head. And so that fanfare theme returned within this movement to kind of remind that it still hangs there and that you're unable to outrun it, which I know is probably a very positive way to think about things, but the symphony actually, it really ends very excitingly, and it is just in many ways a very satisfying work to listen to. Well, I hope that this talk has given you some thoughts, some ideas, some things to think about as you're listening to this concert. Thank you for your time and thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the performance.